The Primarchs and their genetic sons, the Adeptus Astartes, are the main characters in the majority of Black Library books. From Nathaniel Garrow and Garviel Loken in the Horus Heresy to Chaplain Boreas and Dakir in the 40k universe, there are multiple examples of compelling literary characters from the ranks of the Space Marines. Even the genetic demigods, the Primarchs, have become characters with depth and emotion that the readers care about. But how well could that translate to the big or small screen? Without the type of character development that can only happen with the written word, can the Astartes and their gene fathers be compelling main characters? This evening on Pod Save the Imperium, I'm joined again by Adam and Danny to discuss that very question. Danny, let's start with you.
Yeah, as excited as people are for the prospect of Space Marines appearing on the screen, whether it be the big or the small screen, the reality is that they are not interesting or exciting characters on a surface level, and that the biggest difference between writing for the page and writing for the screen is that the page gives you the breathing room. It gives you the space to explore thought, emotion, and really dive into the psyche of a character, right? When I teach literature, I often focus on one of the great advantages that prose has is that it can take the time to develop story and develop motivations that are far clearer than what can be done in like drama in a play, because part of the oftentimes what makes it really hard to write for the screen is that you have to very organically put into dialogue what people are feeling without it coming off like a soap opera, right? Like without it being like, I am angry, and being very flat and dull. And so when you have Space Marines who we have to remember are Janissaries, right? Like they are taken from their homes at a young age. They are put through a brutal training regimen. They are literally brainwashed. That is part of their training. And they, the Imperium calls it psychic conditioning, but they are brainwashed to no longer see themselves as human, to see themselves as something completely different, to know no fear, right? Which is a basic human emotion. They're literally programmed to be something different than human. And yes, you can have characters like that who are deeply interesting and flawed and provide wonderful insights into the human condition. But it takes a lot of time to develop that. And if when looking at the Horus Heresy books is a perfect example, is there's how many of those books, there are 30 plus of them, and each Primarch and each main character gets book after book to really establish who they are, right? To really show their character growth. And if you're talking about a screen transition, you have to do, in some cases, 1,000 pages worth of work in 8 hours, 12 hours of time. And not to mention, most of the really interesting insights we get into characters is through descriptions of them, is through their internal monologues, it's through knowing their emotional states. And that's incredibly difficult to do on the screen. You either have to have amazing actors who are capable of conveying that, not to mention you have to have scenes written just to provide that, right? We're talking quiet scenes of a character in their room or a character, walking a hallway. And let's be honest that in the screenwriting business, there is a certain demand for what we call red pages, which are essentially action scenes, right? Like scenes that are engaging regardless of whether you understand what's going on or not. And when you have to balance these red pages, especially for an IP that is based on combat and violence, right? Like, because even reading the books, there's plenty of pages dedicated to just, what we all usually joke as called bolter porn, right? Like, this kind of, fun, often kitschy hyper-violence. It's just, I think it's an incredibly difficult thing to do, incredibly difficult to create these characters and make them relatable, to show these stoic, cold, literally inhuman individuals, and then have the time to show the depth to them. Because yes, they can have depth, no one's arguing that. It's just the medium used to convey that depth isn't really designed for that the same way. So I think it's going to be very difficult, and I think the better answer would probably focus on the kind of human characters more than the Astartes, at least in the beginning, because, part of this too is for a lot of people who got into this kind of universe, you're given entry, like the game far precedes the novels, right? Like, and so for the people who first start reading the novels, and a lot of people who read the novels, their entry point is something else. So they're kind of coming in with some certain knowledge and acceptance of what the universe looks like. And with TV and screen, this is such a much bigger market and viewership that you're going to have people who have no idea what's going on, who've never heard of the Emperor, who have no idea what gene seed is. And you're asking them then to connect to this character who is meant to be a warrior monk, an aesthetic, right? Who rejects earthly pleasures, rejects their humanity in the service of humanity, right? And again, lots of great room for wonderful character development there, but I don't know if that's possible to do in a TV show or movie where people also then expect it to be an action movie or an action show with, the classic grimdark violence. Because let's just take some of the best Horus Heresy novels, like the recent release, The Eternity Gate, which is, about a huge battle, but a lot of that book is not them just fighting, right? It's the quiet moments with the characters. What are they feeling? What are they thinking? What is happening internally? And that's what makes them compelling. But you can't necessarily do that in, again, 8 or 12 hours of TV, right? It doesn't quite work the same way. And so I just think it's going to be an exceptionally difficult task if you try to focus purely on the Astartes or the Primarchs as your kind of entry point into the film TV version of 40K.
Good points. All right, Adam, you're up next.
I think that it's difficult but doable to create a character that people can gravitate to. I think two good examples, well, I shouldn't say good examples. One good example might be The Mandalorian, which is probably the closest you'll get to a Space Marine that's not a Space Marine, in that they're trained since childhood to be a soldier. Now, he doesn't have I shouldn't say he doesn't have the indoctrination, but he actually kind of does. It's just not as extreme as the books make it out for Space Marines. And over the course of the time, you can see him start to, if not question, to kind of, so to speak, loosen up and seem more human, even though he's wearing the helmet for a majority of the time. It's a credit to the actor that you're able to tell and you're able to see him emote with the helmet on before, especially that first season. And I think if you have an actor like that, a story that can allow the actor to do that, you can bring out the humanity in something that is not known or doesn't express his humanity as normal people would. On the flip side, however, you have Halo, which, funny enough, has his helmet off all the time. So, and I think in that case, they went more with the action stuff, like Danny was mentioning, and they did somewhat into his character and his upbringing. But for me personally, I just didn't have that same connection that I did with Mandalorian. And I think that it could have been the writing, it could have been the actor, it could have been the director. I don't know enough to really pinpoint it, but there's just something about the Halo show when compared, especially to the Mandalorian, where you get these two separate results in how I feel and me connecting with either show. So I think the possibility is there that you could have a Halo where you just don't identify, and he just seems to do nothing in between the battles, because the battle scenes were pretty good for the most part, but everything outside of that did not really click for me. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have Mandalorian, which, like I said, except for the the implants, the bulking up, the superhuman size, he has a lot of traits that a Space Marine would have, especially when it comes to the indoctrination and just being a soldier from a small child. I think one way you could take the story is like with Mandalorian, because in the end they're literally child soldiers that happen to look like giants because they accelerate the growth, and there's not enough time for a child that age, to mature into a healthy adult. And I think you can probably take a story where maybe they become one over the course of a season or a number of seasons. And that's where I think it would need to go. But, I mean, there could be other avenues to do that, to make you care about them. Even if it's just one, it doesn't need to be a squad or a whole army. Almost like a Inquisitor retinue that happens to have a Space Marine, like a Xenos Inquisitor that has a Space Marine Death Watch soldier. And you can see him change over the course of their adventures with the Inquisitor. Almost like the Eisenhorn trilogy itself, where the warband changes over time as their adventures and casualties take its toll over the course of that series. And the subsequent books afterwards, for any fans that read all the other books associated with Eisenhorn. So yeah, I think it's doable. It's a fine line. I'll admit that, and it's it could easily become just like Halo, but then I think you could easily make it as good as Mandalorian with the right creative people behind it.
Yeah, I had not thought of the Mandalorian. That's a really interesting point. It keeps the helmet on the whole time. It's like a religion almost too, which is like the Astartes kind of borderline on that. That's really interesting. When I came into this topic, I immediately was on the side of like, well, yeah, of course you can do it, because I care very deeply about several of the characters in the Horus Heresy, like Nathaniel Garrow, Garvio Loken. I never thought this would happen, but like even Mortarion and the Khan and their relationship, and Sanguinius is like a really compelling character. Sanguinius is probably the most human of the Primarchs. At least he comes across that way, But then I also thought, yeah, but I've been reading tens of thousands of pages of novels, right? Like I've literally read every Horus Heresy book that's out, and like I'm depressed because the next one's not out yet, like because I'm connected and I want to know what's going to happen to the characters, even though I know what happens to the characters because I know the basic storyline. And then I also started to think about, okay, well, what's been out so far in terms of media that's not literary for Space Marines, and it hasn't been great. Like even the short Astartes on YouTube that then got bought out by GW, and they so far haven't done anything with it. Even that, like, I don't think the Space Marines really talked. Like, I think they talked a little bit. Yeah, like, and that guy in the first couple episodes, you're like, oh, okay, these are like, okay, Space Marines. They're gods. They walk around. They get shot by giant cannons, but then blow up the giant cannon because it doesn't hurt them. Like, and all this stuff. But then, like, at the end, you do actually start to feel for them, because he does a really good job of, like, making you start to care. But to Danny's point, I probably only care because I know all the lore. Right? Like, I've already been introduced to the world, and I already know what a Space Marine is, and I already know all this stuff. And so, like, how do you do that, right? How are you going to introduce people who don't know about it to it? And then there's going to be a problem with the shows if they aren't careful, and it's a Game of Thrones problem, right? And the Game of Thrones problem I'm talking about is Daenerys. So, like, people who read the books understood that Daenerys Targaryen was never supposed to be the good guy, right? Like, she's not supposed to be the good guy. If you read the books, she's like Cyrus the Great, which I saw somebody, this is not my original thought, so I'm not going to take credit for it. I saw it on a Reddit thread. She's like Cyrus the Great in that she doesn't like slavery, and she does some really good things, while like doing some really bad things. Like Cyrus the Great conquers Babylon, gets rid of the Babylonians, frees the Jews. Why? Because he doesn't believe in slavery. And so he's got like, he's referred to in the Bible as like a Messiah to the Jews because he sets them free. But Cyrus the Great wasn't a great person. He conquered a lot of people, killed a lot of people, built a giant empire, but like he wasn't quote unquote good, right? And Daenerys has that same problem. Oh yeah, she's freeing all these people and stuff. But anybody who read the books watching the show, like, yeah, she's gonna turn bad, which is why that didn't work in season 8 when she turned bad, right? Besides it being too short of a season or whatever, right? Blah blah blah. It doesn't work because they never properly set it up, because you don't hear her internal thoughts. You don't get those scenes you're talking about, Danny, where like you're sitting with the character and just that character and you get to know that character, right? And so because the TV audience never got to understand what truly made her tick and like how she actually was and how she actually thought and other decisions she made, but the book readers do. And the books aren't even finished and the book readers knew it was coming. Right. So like there's that real danger with the Space Marines and the Primarchs in terms of this. Right. So that's kind of where I landed with it. Was it might be possible, but it's going to take a lot of work, I think. Danny, response?
Yeah, I mean, I think Adam's point of like pointing out the Mandalorian versus Halo as good examples of the Janissary like archetype and like how you can make it useful. And I think the key point here is that what Mandalorian had that makes it effective is that it immediately introduces a other main character who's the exact opposite, right? Like it's the Wolf and Cub story, right? It's Batman and Robin. It's you have Mando, but you also have Grogu, Baby Yoda, right? And that is a character that is built on outward emotion, right? Like it doesn't say anything because it doesn't need to. It's just physically very expressive. It looks cute beyond all belief, right? And that creates that immediate emotional investment, right? And Halo doesn't really have that. They tried it kind of with, one of the characters, and it just didn't really work. So they didn't do enough to actually make that connection happen. And so you could do something like that with Space Marines. I think of an independent Space Marine or 40K short I saw, which was of a guardsman who's alone and injured and surrounded by Tyranids, and like they're in the dark and he's firing his las gun, and it like, he gets like knocked away from him, and he pulls out his combat knife and kills a Hormagon, and he can hear them all rushing him, and you really feel for the guy because the person acting did a very good job of conveying the kind of desperation and this like, oh my god, I'm gonna die, but I have to try to live, and this almost acceptance as he knows he's about to be rushed with just his combat knife. And then a Space Marine comes out of frickin' nowhere and just demolishes these Hormagons, and then picks him up, right, gives him back his las gun, and is like, the Emperor protects, and they go off together, right? And it's, a 5-minute short, but it was really effective because the Space Marine was not the star, the Guardsman was, right? And I think that's something that you would have to be careful of and mindful of in the show, is that I don't think you could really have it as just Space Marines. I think, at least in the initial, you need the human element. You need someone to play off and create that thaw, because in The Mandalorian, what creates the thaw is Grogu, right? Like that's the impetus that pushes that character development of the Mandalorian to forego his training, to break from what has worked for him and open up emotionally. And that whole show is about a man learning to be a cold-hearted person, learning to be a father, right? Which is beautiful and great, and a timeless story that is very resonant with pretty much everyone, because everyone can relate to parenthood, and whether as a child and your relationship with your parents, or as a parent and your relationship to your children. And that's hard to do with the Space Marines because they do not have children, right? And they're not supposed to have children. They're not supposed to be fatherly, right? That's something that's literally conditioned out of them, right? Unless we're going with old White Scars lore, which they haven't really talked about in a long time, which is that they did father, children. But it's one of those things that I do think it's possible. I think you can make really compelling film or television with Space Marines in it. I do not think it is possible if they are the only focus and you don't have a human main character to build upon. And also, even if you did try it, like, and you again with the Mandalorian, the difference between Mandalorian and Halo is the Mandalorian had not just Pedro Pascal, who's an amazing actor. It also had literally the weight of the largest IP machine behind it, right? Like, we're talking people who are very experienced writers, directors, right? People who live and breathe that lore. You also had the physical performance from Brendan Wayne to be the Mandalorian when Pedro Pascal was not, right? Like, to have those physical mannerisms and to be a physical actor as opposed to a voice actor. And then there's also the reality of, again, a big difference between the written word and a performed piece, especially film and television, is that the written, like, Dan Abnett wrote the first book of that has written so many of the Horus Heresy. It's just
he wrote the first one, Horus.
Yeah,
Rising,
he wrote the first three.
The
Horus Rising. Yeah. But this is the thing is, when you're reading a book by Dan Abnett, you're reading a book by him. There might be an editor who gives some feedback, but he is the sole creative drive. He is the one creating the world and creating these characters. That does not happen in film or television, because you have a director, you have an actor, you have the screenwriters, you have the executive producers, you have the costumers, you have just literally dozens of people who are all responsible for giving you what you're seeing. And if they're not all on the same page, if they don't have a unified vision of what this should be, it very quickly falls apart. So you can have someone like, again, Henry Cavill, who knows the lore wonderfully and who is a very strong actor. That doesn't mean that you're going to have a director or a screenwriter who is going to be able to capture what needs to be captured. And I think that's, again, another problem that the Primarch Astarte issue, because this is a very specific issue of how to make these characters compelling, that unless they are everyone on board for all creative decisions, are deeply immersed in this IP and this lore and understand the struggles they will have and how to overcome them, I don't think you're going to get a great product, right? Like, it's just logistically almost impossible. And I don't, even with Amazon money, I don't know if that is something you can really overcome in the beginning. I think that's something you need to work into and develop first.
Yeah. I mean, those are really good points. I think that when you're talking about how Mando's got, the father and son type thing going on, I started to think about, well, all the characters I really relate to that are either Primarch or Space Marine always have a human involved in some way, shape, or form. That is the one that you compare them to, and you get that perspective of the human element, and you get that perspective of what they're like. So, like, Loken has his Remembrancer, right? And I mean, even Angron and Karn have Lotara Saren, right? So, like, there's these humans that are there, and they're big roles. The Bringer of Sorrows for the Blood Angels has, like, his serfs who he ignores or whatever for a long time, but he actually ends up caring enough about them, and you see their perspective of him, like, and you get the sense of what he's like from them sometimes in the novels. And so I think that really lends itself well, because I was thinking, I don't really like the 40K books as much that are Space Marine centered. Love Eisenhorn, love Ravenor. The Beckwin novels, in my opinion, are two of the best novels they've ever put out.
Yeah,
right?
The Beckwin stuff is amazing.
Like, it's amazing, but there's no Space Marines. There's very little Space Marines, right? But the 40K Space Marine novels are just Space Marines. Like, even I love Space Wolves. The most recent Space Wolf novel from the Indominus Crusade, like, setting was not that great, in my opinion, but there were no humans in it. It was just them. Whereas the Space Wolf novels, the Vilka Fenrica novels from the Horus Heresy, are awesome because they've always got their, like, guys around there. They don't call them remembrers. What do they call those guys? Oh, the ones that are like the Space Wolves have their own, like, Remembrancer Corps as it is, right? That tells all their word. So, like, they have those perspectives all the time also. So that was really interesting, that point where, like, you're like, yeah, Mandalorian works because it's got this other part to it that humanizes everything. And I think that's probably an important thing that they'll need. Adam, do you have something to add?
Just to reiterate, and Danny brought it up, in regards to why Mandalorian works and Halo didn't. And I think in terms of stories, whether it's a Primarch or just a Space Marine, I almost feel like it maybe if I were to do a story, it'd almost be like the Gotrek and Felix type of storyline would be good. You know, whether it's the Space Marine and his serf. You know, if like in the Blood Angel Space Marine, the one from Xeraphon, I believe, the one that has all the augmetics that land fixes.
That's the Bringer of Stars guy, Rob Zephon, right?
Yeah,
he's the one that
so he has his serfs.
Call fixes, right?
Was it called? No, I think it was.
Ark and Land. Ark and
Land fixes it because that's like his favorite Space Marine for some reason. I think if they have even the Kane books, he has his Valhallan sidekick that's with him the whole time, and in reading those books, I came to like that side character more than the main character. So I think if you do almost a like whether he's a Death Watch Marine or some type of Marine on some type of quest because he did something bad with his chapter and now he's on this solo quest to redeem himself, and he has his serf or some type of menial with him that goes on his travels to witness his deeds so that he can go back to the chapter. If you guys remember Blood Quest, I don't know if you guys do, but if the Blood Quest comic, which was a group of Blood Angels that were on a quest to get a sword that they lost. But if you have something similar, but replace the Space Marines, just have one Space Marine and have him with maybe a couple of human that were maybe just his serfs and maybe a scribe to keep track of everything, similar to, like they said, the Gotrek and Felix concept. That might work because hopefully you care more for those human characters who have that the Space Marine happens to bring along.
I was going to say, I think some of the best 40K webcomics that are out there is the one that's Battle Brothers, which is about the one of each kind of main Space Marines with a little girl they rescue, right? And what makes it, and it's meant to be comedic, but what makes it more engaging than just like, haha, here's random shit happening, is that it's it's their interaction with this small human child, right? And trying to basically train her to be a Space Marine, and obviously playing on their different foibles. And it's meant for comedic effect, but it's very effective because, again, the Janissary figure is a power fantasy that is fun and works great for like video games, right? Or role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons or something. But like as characters you have to watch and think about and emotionally connect to, it's very difficult. And this is not hard to solve in many ways if you want Space Marines, which is, again, I go back to have Space Marines with some guardsmen, right? Like a decimated squad of Space Marines where only got 2 or 3, and then with a squad of guardsmen they find, and they've got to go on a mission or get involved in this, and you have a perfect amount of kind of that balance and interplay of characters you can immediately start engaging with, which also highlights, I think, which highlights also what makes Space Marines special, the fact that they're 8 feet tall and like 500 pounds of muscle, right? And weigh like something like almost a ton in their armor, yet can still run like 40 miles an hour, right? Like, and you just show that like these are insane superhuman creations. And to see that, that becomes more apparent when you see normal people, right? It's the joke we often make of every Olympic sport should have a normal person attempt it first before you see the actual Olympians do it, because it gives you context of how hard it is.
Or have a normal person running along with the Olympians. What do they do? Yeah, good points. Adam, you got any final thoughts?
Not really. I mean, I think what I've said and what Danny said, I think we're coming closer to what we agreed to in that you can't have, as much as some of us would like, an all Space Marine show with all Space Marines and all bolters. It won't translate well to the general audience, which is really who you want to get at. So hopefully there'll be more compelling stories that happen to include Space Marines, but does not focus solely on Space Marines.
All right. Well, we appreciate you joining us for our discussion this evening. We hope you enjoyed it. You can follow us on social media on Facebook and Instagram at PodSaveTheImperium, and stay tuned for more episodes.